Good evening, welcome back. Hope you had a good day and you finally decided to summarize some of the stuff in course 2 real estate salesperson program delivered by Humber, and I'm so glad to have you. So let's not waste any time, and today we're going to be summarizing module 16. It is a lot of reading, but in the summary, so I'm going to click lesson 1. Lesson 1 talks about complete a residential agreement of purchase and sale. Okay, so if we click on it and we see that there are a lot of pages here, but when I went to the summary here, it literally didn't tell me anything. So I'm going to read the summary and go over the pages that we have, see if we can find information that could be useful to us. So let's talk about creating an offer plan. Before drafting an offer, create an offer plan to summarize the information you need to help ensure no detail is missing. Use the following steps to prepare an offer plan. Summarize the offer mathematics, identify the required dates, list the required information to be included on the schedule, identify any additional information required for the offer. And then they talk about signing an acceptance offer. Once an offer is accepted, the party who accepts the offer will complete the confirmation of acceptance portion of the agreement of purchase and sale. The seller and the buyer will sign and date the agreement and have someone, usually their salesperson, witness their signing. The remuneration or commission trust portion of the agreement will be completed when a cooperating brokerage is involved in the transaction. The acknowledgement portion of the agreement will be completed and signed only when the seller and the buyer have received signed accepted copies of the agreement. So that was literally the summary of the whole lesson 1 thing, but let's just go over the pages here, see what we can see and find information that we might be able to use. The offer plan. The key elements in preparing an offer is ensuring the details. Clauses include conditions and terms are accurate and complete. The terms identify what has been agreed to by the seller and buyer, and there cannot be any ambiguity, misunderstanding, or error. While many residential offers can be similar, no two transactions are alike. Competence when drafting an offer to ensure the requirements of each seller or buyer is addressed is important, as once an offer has been signed, the party is bound to that offer. Okay, let's move on to the next page. So, information to identify an offer. Summarize the offer in mathematics, identify the required dates, list the required information to be included on a schedule, identify any additional information required for the offer. There are several steps that can be followed to ensure an offer is complete and addresses all requirements of the seller or buyer. In some instances, a salesperson may not be the individual preparing the offer, so the directions to any other individual need to be clear to avoid any misunderstandings and errors. So that's basically it. Let's move on to the next page. Here's a video, you can watch that on your own. Identify additional information to prepare an offer. You will require additional information from the buyer and the listing. After the discussion with you, the buyer will determine the offer price, deposit, closing dates, schedules to include, fixtures to stay, and clauses to be included in the schedule. Let's move on to the next page. Signing and enlisting an offer. Once the offer has been prepared and reviewed, the buyer will sign and date the agreement. Once the offer is accepted, the party who accepts the offer will complete the confirmation of acceptance portion of the agreement of purchase and sale. The accepting party will sign and identify the time and date of acceptance. In this example, it will be the seller. When a cooperating brokerage is involved in the transaction, the salesperson for each brokerage will sign the remuneration or the commission trust agreement portion of the agreement. Signing is completed by the listing and cooperating brokerages after acceptance of the offer. Cool. So this is basically one of the offer plans. Here, it looks like this. So we got the address, the buyer, the seller, offer price. Make sure you summarize the mathematics, deposit to be paid and all that stuff. Balance due. Okay. This is what an offer plan looks like. Okay, let's get back here. And let's move on to the next slide. It just talks about the offer. So basically it's not a lot of reading. It literally just tells you how to make or how to fill out stuff in the offer plan. I'm not going to do any math right now because my brain is not working properly, and we're just going to skip right to it. Okay, so there may be a lot of pages, but it literally just tells you what to do if you have an offer plan form in front of you. Yeah. Okay, you guys get the idea. So basically it literally just tells you how to fill out the form. I highly recommend you go through it. I mean, you won't be able to go to the next slide unless you do this. I've already done it. That's why I can skip through it easily. Yeah, so this is literally it. So that's lesson 1. Let's move on to lesson 2. Lesson 2 talks about clauses in an offer, identifying the terms parties agree to. So here we can go to the summary, see what they say. So there's deposit clauses. For some agreements, a buyer might pay a supplement deposit to the initial deposit prior to the completion date. A supplement deposit may also be paid upon notification or removal of a condition inserted in the offer. To pay supplement deposits, you will need to add a clause detailing the amount of each supplement deposit, who it will be paid to, and how and when it will be paid. A buyer might request interest on a deposit being held when making a large deposit with a long closing. If the deposit bears interest, the agreement must detail how the interest will be calculated and paid out. In this situation, you will need to add a clause to the agreement's schedule. Acknowledgements and agreements. You will use an acknowledgement clause to avoid assumption and clarify items that could be misunderstood. As a clause, an acknowledgement is simply a written statement by one or both parties that something exists or does not exist. Makes sense. Representation or warranties. Representation and warranty clauses are intended to protect the seller or buyer regarding an existing fact, or even that could be the basic of rescinding. Oh my god, I can't pronounce this word. Rescinding. I'm just gonna say rescinding an agreement if found false. If I pronounce that wrong, please correct me. Let me know what I did wrong. Okay, cool. Next, moving on. Directions or consents. You will use direction or consent clauses when circumstances arise in which a seller or buyer must take some action in furtherance of the contract. Interesting. Covenants. You will use a covenant type clause when there is an enforceable restriction or obligations connected with the property for all subsequent buyers of the property being purchased. Example, use, lease, or structural restrictions, etc. Conditions. You will use a conditional clause when the seller or buyer requires a condition to be fulfilled in order for the agreement to become binding. So this was basically the summary of lesson 2. Let's see if we can find more information here. And moving on here. Okay, basically everything we talked about, but in more details. I do strongly suggest you read this through so you understand it better. Lesson 3 is basically summary practice activities. We're not going to do that. Module summary, they talk about the same thing. We can go through it. So complete a residential agreement of purchase and sale. Before drafting an offer, follow the steps to create an offer plan to summarize the information you need and help ensure no detail is missing. Once an offer is accepted, as a salesperson, you will need to ensure the seller and buyer sign the required portion of the agreement as they're at the right stage of the process, including the confirmation of acceptance and the acknowledgments. Cool. Sounds good. Clause in an offer identifying the terms party agreed to. Okay. I'm gonna read this because this might be helpful because they do give examples. So I'm just gonna read this. As a salesperson, you have the obligation to include the appropriate clauses in the agreement. Well-written clauses document the transaction clearly for the benefit of all parties. The initial deposit received from the buyer is identified on the first page of an agreement of purchase and sale. Any subsequent deposit provisions are identified in a clause on a Schedule A. You have several options to consider when including a clause on an offer regarding a supplement deposit being paid by the buyer, such as the number of deposits, the amount of each deposit, and when it will be paid, where the deposit will be held, and whether the deposit will earn interest. When a buyer makes one or more supplement deposits, you will also need to consider the impact on the balance due on closing. Assumptions and misunderstandings of what is contained in real estate transaction have the potential for disputes and legal action. Does the buyer acknowledge, for example, the property had water damage or was used as a grow operation? To prevent problems after closing, you will need to ensure the party you represent is protected by adding appropriate clauses to the agreement. You will need to understand and draft clauses relating to the rights, acknowledgments, and representations and warranties. Make sense? Cool. So that was basically lesson module 16. I hope you learned something, as I did as well. Thank you. Leave a like, comment. Let me know what I did wrong. Let me know what I did right. And I hope you have a good night. Thank you. I'll see you back for module 17.